Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Evolving Masculinity, a Me Too conversation and workshop. My name's Eric Milano. I'm Town Hall's 2018 Inside Out neighborhood resident, and I'm representing Capitol Hill and the Central District. On behalf of Town Hall, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's workshop on Evolving Masculinity with Galen Erickson and Giarratano. So I know Me Too is a challenging topic to discuss, but that's exactly why we need more of events like this. And I'm so grateful that all of you are here to participate in this discussion and to be an active role in where we're going next. So this event is part of our civic series. Our resident events are supported by the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods. Our Inside Out season is supported by the Wincoat Foundation, the Kafin Foundation, and the True Brown Foundation. Our civic series is supported by Boeing, Real Networks Foundation, and KUOW. So tonight, first I'm going to share my own personal journey through masculinity and my inspiration for organizing this event. Then Jordan is going to speak about the power of no, boundary setting, and accountability. After that, Galen's going to come on stage and he's going to share a story about how toxic masculinity impacts all of us and how we can imagine a wholehearted form of manhood. After that, Galen's going to lead us in a series of group discussions on our own experiences with masculinity and what kind of relationships we want to create moving forward. So before I turn things over, I should acknowledge that we are not, in fact, at Town Hall. Our historic First Hill home is closed for major renovation. Thanks to the over 1,000 supporters across the community, we've surpassed $22.5 million raised for that project. So we'll reopen in late 2018. While our building is closed, we're producing a season of events at venues all over Seattle, North and South. So I'd also like to thank the Summit for hosting us tonight. And in the next few weeks, Town Hall is presenting events curated by our Inside Out neighborhood resident. There's 3 other residents along with me representing different neighborhoods. Coming up is Living with Conviction, Sentenced to Debt for Life in Washington, and that's curated by resident Peter DeCampo. And another event coming up is How the Body Holds Its Stories, and that's curated by Jordan Alam. So we have dozens more programs on the calendar. Keep an eye out for upcoming events in your neighborhood and all around town on townhallseattle.org. So finally, I'd like to thank the members in our audience tonight. Town Hall members are the reason we're able to offer most programs for just $5. So if you support broad community access to ideas and creativity, please visit the membership table in the back and consider becoming a member. All right. Give a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so much. So first I'd like to start off by giving recognition to Tarana Burke, who originated the Me Too movement in 2007. And it was then picked up by Alyssa Milano and became viral after that. And the idea behind it was to create empowerment through empathy, to say, I've been there too, I've experienced this too. And that was something that came up in her practice as a counselor. So in the 24 hours after Alyssa Milano posted her tweet, 12 million people posted their Me Too story online, or even just posted Me Too. And 45% of all US Facebook users had friends who had posted Me Too. And in this process, I saw my own friends posting their Me Too stories. I saw my family members posting their Me Too stories. And it was just really heartbreaking seeing how many people I knew personally had been affected by this. And as I read more articles, I read some really detailed and really horrific cases. And it was terrifying to see how much had occurred that hadn't been talked about, that hadn't been shared, and probably hadn't been healed. And so looking at, after all the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the reveal of all the different cases of abuse and assault, I just kept thinking like, well, I'm so glad I'm not one of those guys. I'm a good guy. I'm an activist. I organize events. I'm a good member of my community. People like me. I'm a nice guy. Until when I was looking through these Me Too posts, I saw my own name show up. And so when I saw that a classmate had posted my name and friends had seen that, and people that I looked up to had seen that, I went into like a full body shock. I could not believe that I saw my name in there. And I was trying to think back about like what that moment was. And she was describing a time where we went out for drinks with some friends in college. And after having a few drinks, all of us went our separate ways, went back to the campus, and she needed a ride home, and I had a car and she didn't. So I said, hey, I have a car, and I had also been attracted to her for a while. And so I gave her a ride back to campus alone, and I had learned how to behave in that situation. After the alcohol had sort of loosened me up a bit, reduced my inhibitions, I learned that I, as a man, take initiative in these situations. So I put my arm around her. I have to make a move. I make the first move. And that's part of what it means to be a man, is to score, is to just go for it, to be aggressive. And so I put my arm over her, and I tried to slip my hand down her shirt. And she pushed my hand away. And according to her post, I tried 5 times, and she pushed my hand away 5 times. And for some reason, I didn't see that as a no. I didn't understand it as a no, even though she didn't say no. And she told me the next day or later at school that she was really upset with me, and I don't know how I responded. I probably didn't do it well, but I forgot about it. I looked at my situation as, well, I blamed it on the alcohol. I didn't really mean to do that. Maybe she's making a big deal out of it. But somehow I was able to not feel it anymore. I could go on and move forward with my life while she was still hurt by it, and also was going through a hard time too, which made it a lot worse. And so once that post came up, I could not believe how much shame and disgust I felt in that I have been contributing to this too. So I wondered, like, how did I get here? I always thought of myself as a good person. I always thought of myself as somebody who was light and gave back to my community. So how is it that I also feel like a terrible person? How is it that I feel like I'm being demonized by my friends? Why do I feel like I'm about to lose all of my friends? But can I also be a good person and a bad person at the same time? And so there was just so much that I didn't know, and so many role models that I didn't have in order to figure out, how do I behave in those situations? What does no look like? How do I understand what an embodied no, or not getting embodied consent without the use of words? And so I didn't understand things like dominance or privilege or entitlement or dehumanization, or also known as objectifying women, but I don't think it really cuts it, the dehumanization of women. And so I was thinking through this, was like, knowing what I know now without the excuses of, well, I was younger, or I was drunk, or I was dumber back then. What if I removed all those excuses, who would I apologize to? So I really started to look at my patterns of behavior and what my dates had looked like. And there were a few people where I was like, I definitely crossed boundaries there. So I had to figure out how to apologize and how to not mess that up too. So I read a lot about how to apologize without needing forgiveness, how to apologize without requiring a response, without requiring their emotional energy to respond to me, reaching out to them out of the blue during the heat of the Me Too movement. And so what I learned was that I need to center their hurt. It's not about the fact that I feel ashamed or that I feel hurt or that I made a mistake and they need to forgive me. I need to center their hurt. And so a couple people that I had written to didn't write back. And a couple people that did write back, one person said, "You, out of all the guys who had hurt me, you are the only person that has actually apologized. So thank you." The other person that wrote back, I had told her I had learned about sexual abuse in queer communities, and that was my first sort of understanding about how much it hurts. And she said, "That's great, but I would really hope that you do this work with other straight men." So being here tonight is actually an expression of centering her needs and creating an event that is public and is intentionally public. Because for so long, these conversations have been silent and they've been hidden. And abuse thrives in silence. And that's a big part of what I've learned. So I created this diagram after understanding, like, why is it that so many women, why is it the people who have survived this abuse, why is it now their role to speak up? Why is it their role to initiate and use their emotional energy in order to share their stories? Why is it them again? Where are the men in this story? So after that post came out, after 6 days of trying to figure out how I was going to say it, I posted on Facebook what I had done and that I was sorry and that I needed to put myself in that place where I take ownership and admit that I have caused harm. So what I realized is there is this culture of silence that we have. So on one side we have the survivor who feels shame out of what has happened, but there's also this fear of retaliation, which is very real. Being fired for speaking up against your boss. And if there is no story told, then no one can know about the problem. Healing is impossible. On the other side, you have the perpetrator, somebody like me, where I also feel the shame in what I have done and the mistake that I had made. But I also have the fear of retaliation of what happens if I say what I've done? What is waiting for me on the other side? And usually that's probably prison. People will say, turn yourself into the police. You hear stories of castration. People want to kill you, take your head. And definitely being ostracized, losing your friends, losing your community. So if that's what's waiting for you on the other side of being truthful, would you do it? And so there's this cycle that continues. And if a perpetrator cannot come forward and say, I have done this, then they won't change, because there is nothing that will change them. There is no moment that says, this is something that I've done that is not in line with who I am, and I do not want to be this person. So abuse thrives in silence. So this public event is a specific way to break that cycle of silence and to collaborate and to look at how do we change this culture? How do we actively participate in it? And thankfully, Me Too has made that possible. It has broken that silence for so many people. Another thing that blew my mind in the process is that I was born in 1988. And sexual harassment and assault has existed before 1988. That really blew my mind. I was like, wait, hold on, I haven't even existed yet. And these exact same things were happening at work and at home. So how did this culture that I was born into, how did that shape me? And that is where my journey began. So the thing that has helped me the most is understanding the man box. Does anybody know what this is, or have they heard of it? Cool. A couple of people. It's one of the most helpful tools that I found. And this is the narrow definition of what many men feel they have to live up to. So the first characteristic is that a man is powerful and dominating. A man is fearless and in control. A man is strong and emotionless, stoic, with the exception of anger and pride. A man is successful, aggressive in the boardroom and in the bedroom. And women are objects, the property of men and of less value than men. And I would say any identity, non-male, is lesser than men in this situation. Be a man, don't be a pussy, don't be gay. pretty much every boy will hear this multiple times growing up, and I know I did. So Jordan, Galen, and I are here tonight, and we're not here to dictate or say, hey, we have the solution. Hey, there's a new man box that we're trying to create, and you're all invited. We're actually here to explore this and to see what it looks like outside of this box, to see what it looks like when we actually take control of our identities and figure out who we want to be with intention. So tonight we're here to evolve, and some people say like this will take time. You know, it might take years, it might take generations, but I don't believe that. I'm talking about how can we evolve within our lifetime? How can we evolve within a few years, within our own lives, in this room? Is it possible? So tonight we're going to explore that, and I'm super, super grateful to have Jordan Giarratano here. He's my friend. He's been helping me organize this event. He is the founder and head instructor of Fighting Chance Seattle, so please give him a welcome, and thank you all so much for being here.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. It is really heartening to see so many people interested in this conversation. I'm a self-defense instructor, and that's kind of how I ended up here. Initially, I thought my talk was going to be about sharing how I've experienced women's experiences by being a person that other people come to for empowerment, for learning to keep themselves safe. But as I collaborated with Galen and Eric, this talk became a lot more about my masculinity and my manhood and how all of these pieces tie together. From the outside, maybe they seemed very separate. But as we workshopped this material together, the process of preparing this talk really helped me work through a lot of different things and kind of came together for me a little bit. So I want to tell you a little bit about what my manhood looks like, my journey through this, as well as how it all ties together with my work as a self-defense instructor and how that relates to the larger theme of evolving masculinity. That's me. I think a lot of men start just like this, just relaxed, full of joy, full of life, no pressure, no fears, no worries, just ridiculous. I had the most ridiculous curly hair. I was frequently confused for a girl. My mom loved this. Right? You know, and this is what's just there before any of the patterning comes in. This is where we start. I can't even, I found these in an old photo album because I'm in this major phase of digging through my childhood and trying to figure out where all my stuff is. All of my stuff. And man, these ones just stopped me in my tracks. Look at how relaxed that kid is in those shorts. I have not been that relaxed yet since then. And this is me at about 5th and 6th grade. Believe it or not, this kid got bullied. Bad. In the, late 80s, early 90s, when I was growing up, I guess I was ahead of the curve on wearing grown men's glasses as a child. And about this time is where I kind of can really pinpoint a lot of the masculinity messaging taking shape for me. It's at this point that my parents went through a horrific divorce, the acrimony of which went on for more than a decade. And at 10 years old and beyond, I was in the middle of it. I had a younger brother, and it seemed up to me to shield him in any way that I can. So, here I'm as a little boy dealing with a level of emotional intensity that is so far beyond what a child should have to deal with. And this shaped the entirety of my childhood and my teenage years. It's also about this time that I start recognizing that, my shyness, my quietness, being a little artist boy, having an intense empathic quality. I could feel the emotions of everyone around me with no skill to manage or navigate that. I started becoming aware of all of these things by the way they came into conflict. Even this young, think third grade is when I could pinpoint that the other boys had received enough messaging to know that I was the one that didn't fit in, that I either need to be made to fit in through mockery or pushed to the side and marginalized and becoming an outsider. And so that's where I put my tent down, and I've been an outsider ever since. At 13, I discovered karate. I'd been in love with martial arts my whole life since before the Ninja Turtles. I was terrible at it, and I think that's a measure of something you truly love, if you love it in spite of how bad at it you are. And it took me years to get better because I had no concept of my own body. I was incredibly timid. I was so frightened of everything. I was so quiet. I was just like a lump. I was telling one of my students recently, I remember the exact moment where I shifted into a martial artist from a lost chubby kid who couldn't find his feet, because my instructor walked behind me as he saw me perform a move and said, "Who lit a fire under your ass?" That was my moment. I marked it down. That was the moment where it shifted for me. But what I loved about karate is it's systematic. There is a progressive path, and there was space for me to be bad at it. And so I learned one step at a time, and I was able to build self-esteem, which I had never had an opportunity to build before. This is me at, I think, 14 or 15, and this is me at 16, and this is me at 17. That, at the moment, 20 years on, that amount has never been broken within my home dojos, more than my teacher could do. It's like being 17 years old and knowing that I've surpassed my teacher in one thing. The self-esteem that came from that was incredible. But what I'm also learning is that by tapping into the rage and the anger I feel, I am becoming the best version of myself. And so this narrative begins very early for me. And I'm also learning that no matter how much hurt I'm feeling internally, the amount of hurt I can take on physically makes me feel safe, because now I know that I can't be hurt, because I am tougher than the world that is challenging me. And that kind of became an identity for me. I kind of noticed that throughout my 20s, I created fights that weren't even there, because that is my outlook. It's like, well, if we're going to fight, I'm going to win. And if I'm not going to win, I'm going to make you sore. At the very least, I'm not backing down. And I started to realize I've lived my whole life in a suit of armor, and I've lived my whole life behind a mask of anger. And that armor just gets thicker. And there were, times I can see tenderness in my teenage years, with, helping to raise my baby sisters. But as I've gotten older, it has just gotten thicker and heavier. And the anger has turned into rage, because it was anger I could not express. I could not navigate. I could not get back to autonomy. And my rage just kept folding over itself, and pressure just kept crushing it down. I moved to Seattle in 2011, and I opened a karate school, because that is what I reached the point where I wanted to give back. It had given me so much. It had saved my life. For what I've been through, I should not be where I am today as a small business owner, as a community leader. And karate gave me that. So I opened in 2011. The goal was to teach karate and kickboxing and have some fun. Immediately, I started getting requests for teaching self-defense for women workshops. I have a background in it. I have a history, and I assisted in my first workshop when I was 15, and I didn't want to do it. Self-defense for women is so often tied to rape culture and perpetuating the problems with consent that it's supposed to be fixing. And I just didn't want any part of it. And I just kept getting passionate requests for it. For my whole first year, I resisted it. While I was building the business, I worked in a bar, neighborhood bar, not very far from here. And I would work a couple shifts a week to subsidize the dojo. One night, I'm closing the bar. I got two guys in the bar with me. It's like 1:30 in the morning. We've done last call. There are two guys that I knew and liked, that I talked to regularly. Two guys that I knew were attracted to me. And this night, it was just us in the bar. It was empty. They were both a little bit drunk. And one turns to the other while I'm kind of cleaning up and says, I wonder how big his cock is. And they kind of started this really intense sexual conversation about me as if I wasn't there. And it was really uncomfortable. but I'm a bartender. I know how this game goes. And I just felt like I wasn't worried because I'm a big guy and I don't really worry about much, honestly. And the next day, a friend of mine asked me how my shift was, a female friend that someone who was able to reflect a lot back to me. How's your shift? Like, it was a pretty good shift. I made some decent money. At the end of the night, though, it got a little weird. I tell the story, and she says, that's terrible. Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be fine? Like, her response was so intense that I was starting to doubt my response. I was like, okay, why was this bad? And I said, think about it, though. Like, worst case scenario, what's going to happen? I'm a gigantic man. I'm a self-defense instructor. It's not like I'm some 5-foot woman stuck behind the bar. Fuck. And it just hit me. It hit me all at once, this gigantic blind spot. I moved through a completely different world than women do. And it had never occurred to me so intensely how different that is. The times I was in the bar where, I'd go to the back to cook something or clean something, and I'd come back out and hear a female customer say, did you hear that creepy thing he said to me? I missed this world of feeling afraid or just not knowing, who's going to be a threat, who's not going to be a threat. This is the world we actually live in. And when I really kind of digested a lot of this is when I decided, all right, well, if I'm going to do a self-defense workshop, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to try to solve these problems. How can I teach a workshop that is grounded in practical skills, but is based on what I'm hearing are the needs of the people requesting it, rather than me projecting what I, as a male martial artist, would do? And we were very successful. The class has been going for 6 years. It's been sold out pretty much ever since. And it's a heavy, heavy, heavy class to teach. Especially in the early years, it would wipe me out teaching it for days. Again, I, at this point, still had not recognized that I'm an empath and had no tools and no skills to manage or navigate this. And every now and then, despite our best of intentions, a woman would be triggered or panic or get upset, and I didn't really have the tools to deal with that or help. We had a class that was always a male and female instructor. We went out of our way to say, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You don't have to work with me if you don't want to. And still, we would just, every now and then get someone who just got really upset. And I couldn't figure out why. As the class grew, I no longer had to participate as much because I had so many assistant instructors, all female assistant instructors. So they started doing the work and I started training them. And I'd say, all right, I'm going to focus on making sure everybody gets their needs met today. If anybody wants to try anything with me, let me know. And what we noticed was for 4 or 5, 6 classes, no one was requesting to try anything with me. And as we started unpacking it, myself and my assistants, we realized by virtue of my power and authority as an instructor, my role as, a tall, large white man in the room, people felt compelled and coerced to participate in these exercises with me, even though that's not what I wanted. But it is a lot harder, I think, to say no than to choose to opt in. And so we switched the class to an opt-in model. We started asking a lot of questions and listening to what our participants were interested in. And now that we've switched to that and really refocused around the concept of consent, the approach is now, if you want to practice this technique, go up to an instructor and ask them. And now we model back and forth with one another, asking permission before we do everything, making it a yes instead of a no. Because saying no is so hard. I have a huge problem saying no to people I care about. I grew up in a family situation where I didn't get to say no. I still yet have not really had an opportunity to say no. I'm fighting for my boundaries whenever I go back into those old patterns. And I'm sure a lot of these reasons resonate with you, and you probably have your own list of reasons that add to that why saying no can be so difficult. This is my favorite photo from the group. So when the Me Too thing kind of happened, I started paying attention to, all right, well, what other blind spots am I missing? If in my role as an instructor, people felt coerced into consent with me, has that happened at other times? I had a 4 or 5 year self-destructive hookup period that seemed to time nicely with the time I was a bartender, maybe unrelated. And how many of those stories in the moment was I comfortable with? And now when I look back at them, does that match what my definition of consent is now? The best definition I've heard yet is, mutual agreement from my friend Carrie French, who teaches an embodied consent class. And I don't feel comfortable about all of these stories I remember. When someone is saying no and I'm being persistent, or someone is saying no and I'm being extra charming. My self-defense class, now I teach the concept of charm as a verb. Charm isn't a quality. Charm is something you do to get something you want. And that is something I did because a big part of my masculinity was identifying with this role of dominance, this role of strength, this role of being charming. I didn't get seen. I didn't get heard. I didn't get the affection I wanted. I had a big, giant, damn hole that I didn't know about yet. And I'm seeking all of these different ways to get intimacy and connection that I'm absolutely terrified of. And, I haven't had anybody reach out to me, but I don't need that. I know when I try to remember those moments, I don't feel as good about it as I would like to. And so some pieces of this that I think are really important is recognizing that the thing about blind spots is we don't know they're there. And so what can you do to make yourself aware of those blind spots? How could you empower the people around you to share the stuff you don't want to hear? And how could you recognize, own, and yield power? I think in our culture, sometimes those of us who grew up not feeling powerful kind of reject that power. And when we come into power ourselves, we don't own it. We don't take responsibility for it. If I'm a teacher, if I'm a leader, I have responsibility to people and I have to step up and own that power. But I also have all kinds of power that I did nothing for that's systemic. And what are the ways I can yield that power to people who do not have that? For the teen girls in my class, I'm responsible for keeping them safe and getting them in and out of class on time. But I need to yield power so they can feel responsible for their own bodies, so they get to make choices about what is best for them. And how does that work in other areas of your life? Can I create space for no? Can I let the people in my life know that there will be no repercussions if they say no to me, that I welcome hearing no, that I'm going to hear no and say thank you for taking care of yourself, or thank you for trusting me? By creating space for no, I can be sure that when I'm getting a yes, it's real and it's meaningful. And accountability to me also looks like recognizing that your conditioning is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And I did not know enough about what was driving my actions and the patterns behind it until I was able to get some space and do a lot of work around it. Teaching the self-defense workshop became a kind of salvation to me. It's something I started to give back, and having to go through the work of teaching it every month kept me in that practice, kept me in those tools, being surrounded by the courage of the women who were sharing their stories helped me to become aware of my own stories, helped me to access my own courage. And I became aware of just how heavy this armor got. The thing about armor is not live, it's not organic. It covers you and it blocks everything. So it stops some of the pain, but it also stopped me being able to feel. I recognize that I have trouble knowing if I'm hot or cold and whether or not I should put on or take off a sweater. I forget to eat because I don't pay attention to when I'm hungry. I have a hard time letting go and feeling pleasure. I can't feel pleasure all the way. It makes me very uncomfortable. I'm so much more comfortable with enduring pain. And these are strategies that just don't map to the kind of life I want to live right now. This is a photo I took of myself early in my therapy journey when I was trying to figure out what emotions I had, what they looked like in my body, what they looked like on my face, because I only knew of two emotions, rage and moody. It turns out moody is a whole bunch of emotions trying to get through the door at once. Yeah. And so the beginning of that journey was learning to name my emotions, which took me a year and was incredibly frustrating. And this was me trying to figure out what it felt like to be sad, and realizing that I thought anger was my primary emotion. Sadness is my primary emotion. My girlfriend has named this resting sad face. So she knows when she sees me, if I'm in resting sad face, that I'm feeling some of that. But that's real, and that's what's there. And this is a quote that came to me from an ex when I sent her a letter after we broke up, and she just wrote back, this quote and a whole bunch of words, basically paraphrasing that quote further, which was, "We don't need to litigate this. We're done, and we're both hurt. Let's just be hurt." And that was the best fuck off letter I've ever received in my life, because it took me years to start unpacking that. We don't attend to the hurt, and the hurt is the thing that's driving so much of this pattern behavior. And you can't really have empathy for someone else if you're completely and totally in pain yourself. If I want to hear your pain and I can't get past my own pain, if my hurt is just unseen, it becomes challenging to kind of have that wholeness. This is a piece of artwork I made, and I started reconnecting to some of the ways I could kind of express myself through this. And this journey of healing, so many people have been involved helping me with. And I've benefited from all of their work. And I just want to specifically call out the incredible number of women who performed emotional labor for me in so many different ways that is never compensated, is never really respected or even fully understood. But so much of the growth I've been able to make, so much of the work I do now, so much of the work I'm stepping into, other people did before me. And a lot of times those are women whose voices are not sung. They come from different oppressed communities who are not elevated in these conversations. As I kind of looked at what does my own masculinity entail now more mindfully, I want to be able to have the toughness that has guided me my whole life and respect it. I don't want to just throw it away, but I want it to be informed by courage, heart-centered action, by being able to set clear boundaries so I'm not letting myself be hurt, and also resilience. I want to recognize that I'm learning to let go of repression by developing skills around navigating and handling my emotions. And I don't want to just go to endurance as my lone strategy, because a lot of times self-care is a significantly better strategy for me, taking care of my hurt. And then again, having the courage to ask to have my needs met and identify what those needs are on my own. Essentially, I've defined my own my own masculinity. I want to be, strong, but I want to be vulnerable. I want to be fierce, but I want to be nurturing. Essentially, I want to be Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. That's the goal I've set for myself. It's been a hard journey, and it's nowhere near complete. It's a complete work in progress. But what I've learned is that there's a wisdom to my body. I've only had half. The wholehearted masculine journey really resonated with me because when I went to my first men's group with Galen, I started to be around other men who were experiencing the same things as me. I had repressed so much of my rage towards other men that being seen and heard by other men became powerful. And I started recognizing that one half of my power is my strength, is my toughness, but the other half is that I'm very intuitive, I'm very sensitive. I can read a room really easy. Tools I used as a bartender for evil. I am learning that I could be sensitive and empathic in ways that move towards connection. And so underneath all of this, I realized once I was ready to deal with this, my anger was protecting me, my armor was protecting me. When I started owning it, sadness came up for me in a gigantic way because sadness was there to help me move through it and help me let go. And underneath all of that hurt, I found joy. And that is what that looks like on my face. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jordan. You're amazing. So up next, we've got Galen Erickson. As Jordan mentioned before, too, we actually met Galen through the work that he does in Wholehearted Masculine, which is actually the first place that I've ever been where I could share my emotions, be around other men, just to listen to how I'm feeling. And Galen creates that space here in Seattle. So thank you so much for being here, and go for it.
All right, thank you. All right, so I've got some notes here that I'm going to be using. So yes, my name is Galen, and I'm a men's coach, mostly focusing on relationships. I'm one of the co-owners of, or workers of the Wholehearted Masculine. We host men's groups, and one of the things that I'd like to name, just to start, is just to call out the awkwardness that I kind of feel as three white guys standing up here talking about consent, and I've been told that it's really not my place to talk about that. And even in the Wholehearted Masculine work that we've done, there have been a lot of voices of just questioning what we're doing. And I think my response to that is that the people who are suffering most from our society, from an unequal society, and people who are marginalized don't need to be doing all of the work, and that actually we as men need to talk to other men to do this work and for the healing of everyone and for ourselves. So that's one thing I'd like to name just to start. In my perspective, what Me Too made clear, the Me Too movement made clear what a lot of us have known for a long time, and that is that the culture of masculinity was problematic. But before, it was debatable, and it was ignorable, and they didn't have to look at it, and after we saw this outpouring of these responses, it's tough to ignore, and I don't see any real debate about whether or not there's problem with the culture of masculinity. So I want to say thank you to the women for doing what men could not do, and for showing us that something needed to be done. And it's been neat for me as a men's group facilitator, and to see a shift, to see more guys being engaged. I host a monthly men's group for the past few years. It's 3 to 8 guys a night, following sort of the Me Too. We had a group of 22 guys and a group of 35 guys, and I was really blown away to see just the level of increased engagement as guys wanting to participate in this, and like understanding what toxic masculinity is, and so what we're seeing is that there's so the culture of masculinity is problematic, but what do we do? And I want to talk a little bit about what is symptomatic and what is the problem. And one of the things that I need to make clear is that I'm not here to shame men, and I'm not here to emasculate or to make men into timid, guilty people. Quite the contrary. I want to help men be more confident and comfortable in their own skin and more connected to the people in their lives. I help men open the channels to their own hearts so they can receive the love and connection that they deeply desire. And because what I see is that men want to be loved. And one of the things that I'm seeing is there's a lot of fear from guys. Some of the guys who aren't ready to dive into looking at toxic masculinity, they fear that there's all these man haters out there. And it's interesting. I read a post by a woman who was likening her feelings about men. She likened it to being bitten by a dog, and she was says, I don't remember who it was, but she said something like, if you've been bitten by a dog, it's pretty understandable that next time you see a dog, you might not be ready to, go play with it. You have a reaction, but yet we don't call that person a dog hater. So women, what I've seen is that people still want to date men. They just don't want the violence associated with masculinity. And of course, what I'm seeing is that men actually don't want the violence either. It's a funny thing, but for men, there's this expectation that they can that a guy can kick another guy's ass, that he can fight back, and for a man to denounce the violence, those other guys can just brush it off as him being a pussy or a guy who can't fight, and it's Joe Biden of all people. He was at a university and said how he would kick Trump's ass. And so, of course, then Trump tweeted back, this is just this week, that he would kick Biden's ass. And it's like, you guys I wonder, I don't think that either of those guys have ever been in a fight. I'm going to just go on a leap here. I don't think that they have, because if they would know how much it sucks. I was in a fight once. In my mid-20s, I was in a really bad time, and I was angry and full of rage and repressed rage like so many other guys, and I was in a bar, and me and this guy got into it, and I was, like Jordan, I was picked on, and so I learned some martial arts, and so I ended up being more skilled in violence. God, I'm not even clicking through here. Yeah, and the bouncers pulled me off of him, and it was awful. It was awful. During the fight, it was awful. Afterwards, it was awful as I got arrested. It was awful as I spent a couple nights in jail. It was awful as I was in court. What became clear to me is that there are no winners from a fight. And so many of the guys that talk about how they'd kick someone's ass, I don't think they really understand that. But here we are. We're in this culture of masculinity. What do we do? All right, so what is the symptom and what is the cause? Is it time yet? Yes. Okay. I read an op-ed piece in the New York Times that argued that masculinity is inherently brutal. And I've heard this argument in other areas that sort of male sexuality is fundamentally predatory. And I disagree, and I think that view is actually very problematic. I think it creates more problems, because if you believe that and you're a guy, you essentially have two choices. One, you can accept your brutal behavior, and we know what comes from that, and we've seen millions of posts about what comes from that. And the other choice is that you can just repress the nature of your gendered experience and your sexuality. And that creates a host of other problems: depression, anxiety, repression. And I see a lot of that in Seattle. So one of the things that we're seeing is that if you only address the symptoms, you create just different symptoms. And, it's like, Jordan talked about repressing the fear or the anger. And this is something that I've dealt with. I tend to repress my anger, and then it blows up. And I told you a story of it blowing up. And so then, fearing my anger blowing up, I repress it more. As I bottle it up, I bottle it with a thicker bottle and a tighter cap. And it's pretty awkward. And so for me, it's been a practice of learning to have a healthy relationship with my anger. And I have my girlfriend Angela to thank for that. She's over here, and she's really good. She calls me out, and she's like, "Galen, are you angry about something?" Maybe. Yeah, I'm angry. But there's this repression. We see this in society all around, around violence and around sexuality. But then that creates other problems, right? I think a lot of the sexual repression creates more awkwardness around sexuality and men expressing their sexuality. And it's easy, to look at all these Me Too posts and just say, oh, these are bad guys. Those guys were the bad guys, but at least we've got the good guys here. And there's sort of this club of the perfect men that keeps getting smaller as we learn about these things. And, Eric, was shared about his experiences. I've had women talk to me about times feeling that I didn't respect their boundaries. And it's hard to hear. But I don't think that it's a bunch of bad people. I think it's an unhealthy culture. As Jordan pointed out, and I think you guys y'all have probably read many articles, but it's, the ways that men growing up told not to be a pussy, and they become deaf to their own emotions, their own senses, and then they're unable to read another person's emotions or senses. Men are starving for affection. This is something, I don't know if we talk about this often enough. Men will go months without being touched. And it's because any physical touch with women is sexualized, and any touch with men is stigmatized, is gay, because of course that's a bad thing in our society. And men have lived these lives where they've been deprived of affection, they've been told not to be a pussy, they've lived these lives that are actually horribly abusive, but because it's normalized, they don't recognize it as abuse. And so they perpetuate abuse, and they do so unknowingly. And, I bring up these things, clicking, here we go. Repression creates more problems, you saw it already. Culture, okay, we got that. I'm not letting men off the hook, okay? And I don't want to go easy on guys. I mean, we need the accountability. That's how we heal. Like Jordan said, conditioning isn't our fault, but it is our responsibility. And the funny thing about, like I said, Me Too wasn't just committed by a few bad guys. It's a lot of regular guys who just didn't know better or who became deaf to their own intuitive knowing, their own intuitive wisdom. And one of the things that, that I personally have had to face is that toxic masculinity isn't just out there, it's in here. It's easy to see toxic masculinity, and then it's just, this guy or that guy, and what are the ways in which I perpetuate this culture? Because we're either perpetuating the existing culture or creating a new one. It's basically just two choices. So which, and of course, which one is easier, right, if you do nothing? I talk to guys who will say things like, well, I'm married, so this consent stuff doesn't really apply to me, but it's interesting. And I say, really? Because the same disease can cause different symptoms. And the same culture that creates these Me Too posts also keeps men from emotional vulnerability in relationship. Keeps them from full honesty and integrity in relationship. And so part of what we look at in the men's groups that I host often is the way that, toxic masculinity isn't out there, it's in here. So, where do we go? What do we do about it? I know this is really heavy. But where do we want to go? And I think this is one of the things that's been coming up for me is like, all right, we all agree that toxic masculinity exists. Okay, it's here. All right, now what do we do? We know what toxic masculinity looks like, but what does beautiful masculinity look like? What does healing masculinity look like? And this is where I think we need to set our sights is yes, we need to continue having the accountability. We need to look at the problems. We can also need to keep looking at what do we want to work towards? What does beautiful masculinity look like? To me, to give some examples, beautiful masculinity looks like guys who are not afraid to hug other guys. It's guys who have close male friendships. One of the things we're seeing is that especially guys, or as they get older, there's fewer close male friendships. It's beautiful masculinity is men who are able to hold each other accountable and call each other in. It's men who can share emotions with each other, talk about relationships, and support each other in having the type of relationships that they want. Beautiful masculinity to me is men acknowledging their power and using that for good. Not shirking away from their power, but being in their power and acknowledging that. Beautiful masculinity to me looks like men yielding their power so that others can thrive. To me, it looks like men who will ask before sitting down next to a woman. And it's being in touch with their own intuitive sense to tell if someone's uncomfortable. It's men being more curious than persistent in pursuing intimacy. It's men being in touch with their own desire and making clear requests. And then respecting the no, the maybe, and the yes. To me, beautiful masculinity looks like men who are not afraid to open their hearts to love. Men who can compassionately hold another in strong arms. It's men who aren't afraid to be held themselves and to let go of control. To me, beautiful masculinity looks like men who know how to laugh, cry, dance, and sing. And those are just a few examples from my perspective. So, what does beautiful masculinity look like to you? That's the end of that part of my talk. So